Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, November 21st, 2024, and I am thrilled to be with you tonight. So, for a moment, forget every Jewish wedding you ever attended. Forget for a moment your own wedding. Pretend that you never ever saw a Jewish wedding. And let's design together a Jewish wedding from scratch. What would it look like if we were doing it ourselves? And then let's see how it compares to our traditional Jewish wedding today. All right. Well, let's talk about a few different things. Number one, what themes should a wedding ceremony have? Well, love, commitment, home, perhaps family. Okay, so those are some themes that I think we could agree make sense for somehow to incorporate into a wedding ceremony. And in fact, we do find those themes in a Jewish wedding. We find the ksuva, the marriage contract, talks about commitment and talks about love and respect. The Sheva Brachot, the seven blessings, talk about love, of course, talk about home, talk about family. So those are themes that we would expect to find, and we do find in our Jewish wedding ceremony. Okay. What about role models? Who can we think of as some role models that we might want to include somehow or refer to in our wedding ceremony? Okay, well, my first choice would be Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. They're a great role model for marriage. After all, they were the ultimate couple that was meant for each other because, of course, neither of them had anybody else to marry. All right. And yes, we do find Adam and Eve referred to in the Sheva Brachot, the seven blessings. We specifically refer to Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. Another couple, I would suggest, had a pretty good marriage, Avraham and Sarah. We're reading about in these Torah portions this week, Chayei Sarah, the death of Sarah. The life of Sarah that starts with the death of Sarah, of course. Okay, that would be a good role model. And in fact, there are many who suggest that we do invoke Avraham and Sarah in the way that a chuppah, the marriage canopy, is normally designed. You'll hear this very often at weddings, that a chuppah is usually open on all four sides, just a top. And the tent of Avraham and Sarah, our rabbis teach us, was open on all four sides so that guests could come from all directions and not feel they had to walk around to know that they were invited and welcome. Okay, that would be a good couple to invoke, to call to mind at a wedding ceremony. All right, good, role models. What about rituals and ceremonies? Well, I think it makes a lot of sense. A chuppah, which is a canopy, it symbolizes the first home of the bride and groom. That's what we're celebrating. They're beginning their married life as a family together. Okay, so that makes sense. We have a chuppah. Blessings, yeah, that certainly makes sense. We certainly want to bless God for this great joy, this great occasion. We the audience, we want to bless the bride and groom. That certainly makes sense. So yes, that's part of our ceremony. We say brachos thanking God for the love and institution of marriage. We have Sheva Brachot, seven blessings that we, the community, bestow upon this couple, our wishes for this couple. Okay, all right, good. We're making progress. Next, which passages from the Torah might we want to invoke at a wedding ceremony? Now let's think about that a little bit more carefully. Well, Sinai. Our sages explain and describe that the revelation at Sinai, when God spoke to the Jewish people, the Aseret Dibros, the Ten Commandments, that was metaphorically the marriage between God and the Jewish people. So if we want to link human love with divine love, it would be good to invoke the experience of standing at Sinai. Okay, and we do that. That's another meaning, another layer of meaning of the chuppah, meant to indicate Mount Sinai. You remember this kind of strange statement of our rabbis that God held Mount Sinai above the heads of the Jewish people. And of course, there are two interpretations of that, but one of them is that God wanted to protect and embrace the Jewish people by holding the mountain over their head to protect them, to envelop them in God's presence. Okay. You might think, let's invoke passages from Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which is overtly a love poem between a lover and the beloved. Here we have to be cautious, because our sages tell us, yes, I know that phrases and lines and passages from Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, are often used and quoted and referred to at a Jewish wedding. I know that. However, I do have to say, the Talmud does explicitly say that we are not to use phrases from Shir HaShirim to refer to human love. We understand that it is a metaphor, that it is meant to convey the relationship between God and the Jewish people, and we would be making a mistake if we think that it is simply a story between a human man and a woman who are passionately in love and fall out of love. So we need to be careful about that, although maybe that would be intuitive that we ought to invoke it. We need to be a little cautious about that. Okay. But there is one passage in the Torah that I think no one on their own would think to invoke at a wedding ceremony. Although, in fact, it is central to our Jewish wedding ceremony, and that is the beginning of this week's Torah portion, Chayei Sarah. The Torah tells us that Sarah dies. Avraham mourns for her and eulogizes her. Avraham needs a burial plot for her because, remember, notwithstanding all of God's promises that Avraham and his descendants would inherit the land and would have the land of Israel, at the moment, Avraham does not own any part of the land of Israel. That promise so far has gone unfulfilled. So, Avraham goes to the people of Ches in the southern part of Israel. He approaches a man named Efron, and he says to Efron, I want to purchase from you a field that you own, and this is a field that has a cave. We know this is Ma'arat HaMachpelah. And I want to purchase this from you, Avram says to Efron, in order to use it as a burial place for Sarah. Okay, and there's some negotiating over it. And then finally, Avraham purchases the field from Efron to have as a burial place to bury Sarah. Our rabbis explain in the Talmud that we invoke that passage as the centerpiece of every Jewish wedding ceremony. The act that creates the marriage, which is the giving of a ring, that the groom gives a ring and places it on the finger of the bride and the bride accepts it. That is what makes the couple married according to Jewish law. That ceremony is based on the episode with Avraham purchasing the field from Efron. Now, this leads to a very understandable misunderstanding. And the misunderstanding, which is very understandable and it's very widespread, is that wedding, a marriage ceremony, a Jewish marriage ceremony, is a purchase, that the man acquires the woman. It's understandable that people say that, because if you're doing a ceremony explicitly meant to invoke the episode with Efron, well, Efron, that was a purchase. Avraham purchased, he bought a field for money, for silver pieces, 400 silver pieces from Efron. So if that's what we're going to invoke, presumably it's the same kind of thing. It's a purchase. It's understandable that people make that mistake, but it is wrong. It is wrong. There is no sense in any classic Jewish source that marriage is an acquisition in any manner. There is no sense in which there is a concept of ownership in marriage. No sense that a wife somehow belongs to a husband. And I just want to be clear. It doesn't matter how many times you've heard it. It doesn't matter how many times you've seen it written. It doesn't matter who says it. It's wrong. That's it. It's just wrong. It's a misunderstanding. I'm explaining why it's a misunderstanding, but it's wrong. There is no basis to it whatsoever, no matter how many times you see it or hear it. Okay. So in that case, why connect these two episodes? Especially since, according to what I'm saying, there is no apparent thematic connection. One is about, I don't mean to laugh, it's not funny. One is about a death and a funeral and a burial place and a purchase of a piece of land. And the other is about a marriage, a wedding between a husband and wife, a bride and a groom. So why in the world, at a wedding ceremony, would we want to invoke this specific passage? I want to share with you tonight 3 answers. Avraham approaches this man named Efron. He says, I want to purchase the field from you. There's back and forth. And finally, Avraham pays the amount of 400 silver pieces. And the Torah says as follows. Listen carefully to the words. Vayakam stay Efron asher b'machpelah asher lifnei Mamre. The field of Efron, Hasadeh, the field, v'hama'ara asher bo, and the cave that was in the field, v'chol ha'etz asher basadeh, and all the trees that were on the field. This is like a title document. Asher b'chol gvulos aviv. So it's the piece of land and the cave, that means going down under the land, and the trees growing on top of the land. So it's like, this vertical purchase. All of that is vayakam. It is established, which means the purchase is formalized. It's established. Vayakam means it's established. It's formalized. The sale takes place. Okay, that's what it means. Rashi says, the word vayakam, which we understand to mean was established or was formalized in the ownership. Before it was Ephron's and now it's Avraham. So this transition, this change in title and ownership was established. It was formalized. But the word vayakam literally means vayakam, and it rose. It went higher. That's what the word literally means. Rashi says, Tekuma haisalo. The land underwent an elevation. Not a physical elevation, right? The land didn't move. Sheyatza miad hediot liyad melech. it underwent an elevation from a lower level of holiness when it was owned by Efron to a higher level of holiness when it was owned by Avraham. The common denominator between the episode with Efron and a marriage ceremony is a change in status, an elevation from a lower level of holiness to a higher level of holiness. The field is elevated in Kedusha, in holiness, because first it belongs to Efron, it does not have holiness, and then after the purchase, it belongs to Avraham. And once it belongs to Avraham, it has a higher level of holiness, because now this becomes Eretz Yisrael. This becomes a land that has Kedushat Haaretz, sanctity of the land of Israel. This is the first plot of the fulfillment of God's promise, which will eventually be all of Israel. But there is a transition, there is a change in status to a higher level of holiness that this land undergoes. And that is precisely, in spiritual terms, what is happening to the bride and groom at the moment of their marriage. They are being elevated from two single individuals, which have a certain level of holiness. Every one of us has a certain level of holiness by right of being a human being. But they're being transformed from two separate individuals into a married couple. And a married couple has a higher level of holiness. There's more Kedusha. That's why we call the wedding ceremony, the marriage ceremony, Kiddushin. We mean it is the achievement of a higher level of holiness. So we invoke at the wedding ceremony, we have the ceremony of giving a ring, which is explicitly meant to remind us to invoke the episode with Efron, not because it's a purchase, but because it's a transformation. It is an elevation in holiness. We invoke Efron to show the couple and to show everyone present that what marriage can achieve is a higher level of holiness for this couple. And that's why standing under the chuppah for the bride and groom, for everybody, it is an intensely spiritual moment. And that is the deepest meaning of marriage on a spiritual level, because what is happening is that each one of these individuals, the bride and the groom, they become different. They achieve a higher level of Kedusha, of holiness. And they become connected to each other with the same strength as our connection to the land of Israel. That's why we invoke this. The change in status that creates the link between the people of Israel and the land of Israel is parallel to the change in status between the bride and groom from single individuals into a married couple, the same strong bond. And that bond is stronger today than ever, and more important to emphasize today than ever before. That's the first reason why we invoke Efron at a wedding ceremony. The second reason I want to share, I heard from Rabbi Mordechai Willig, and he explains that there is, in fact, one way in which Kiddushin marriage is like a purchase, not because anyone is acquiring anything, but the reason that we borrow the form from an episode which includes a purchase is because both a purchase and a marriage, the common denominator in a legal sense, both require mutual consent. And they convey the issue that in Jewish law is called mekach ta'os. Mekach ta'os means if I buy something under false pretenses, the sale is invalid. If I buy something and you establish for me that what I am buying has X quality, and it turns out that you lied and what you're selling me is not what you told me that you're selling me, you've sold something to me under false pretenses. That's mekach ta'os. That means the sale is invalid. There has to be will. There has to be informed consent on the part of the seller and on the part of the buyer. The buyer has to know what it is that he's buying. If the seller fools the buyer, hides a flaw that the buyer could not have expected to see on his or her own, then the seller has committed fraud and is liable for that fraud. Similarly, in a marriage, if one hides flaws that are serious and that are relevant and that could not realistically have been identified by the other before the wedding, and only after the wedding is it identified, that might be grounds for kiddushay ta'os, marriage under false pretenses. If you present to me that your name is so-and-so and you live so-and-so and you have such and such a family and such a home and a business, and there's no reason for me to doubt it, and then we get married, and then it turns out right after the wedding I find out you're not who you said you were, and your family is not who you said they were, and the business is not what you said it was, everything about your life is a fraud, then that raises the issue of kiddushay ta'os. Maybe we enter this marriage on false pretenses. And this is a very, very serious issue today because in recent years, there has been a plague in the Jewish people, especially within the religious orthodox Jewish people. And it is a plague that I am heartbroken to say is getting worse. A plague of marriages that end in divorce soon after the wedding. A week, a month, 6 months after the wedding, there's a divorce. What happened? Obviously, each case is different. But in many cases that I am directly involved with, and rabbis all over are involved with these cases, in many cases what happened is there was a serious flaw. For example, an undisclosed illness that is serious, that was undetectable, that was not revealed, something that had a person known, they never would have entered into this marriage, but because it's hidden, they get married, and as soon as they're married, they find out the truth, and it's something they can't live with. And I'm talking about serious stuff. I'm talking about schizophrenia, psychosis, serious mental illness that somehow a person was able to hide, but serious, involving, God forbid, violence, criminal behavior, drug use. It's a plague. It is the amount of misery and suffering that is caused by this phenomena is it's just unimaginable. Unless you're involved with this subject, you would not be able to imagine the amount of suffering and pain that goes on. And here is one contributing factor. Not the only one, but one contributing factor. We all know, we talk about this, we repeat it, we emphasize it all the time. There's a terrible, serious prohibition against Lashon Hara. Don't say negative things. Don't say negative things. Don't gossip. Don't say negative things about people. We've discussed this before. There is a category called Lashon Hara L'To'eles, to say something negative when there is a constructive purpose. For example, let's just use this example. If someone says to me, I'm dating, a young woman says to me, I'm dating this fellow. What do you think about him? Do you know anything about him that maybe I should know about? Maybe I should be careful about. Well, let's say I happen to know that the person suffers from something serious. Let's say I know, and I know it from confidential reasons, let's say I know that this person, God forbid, is involved with gambling. If you're not familiar with this, first of all, you should be blessed and never have to deal with this. Gambling addiction is one of the worst situations in all of life. As bad as or worse than cocaine or heroin or any other kind of addiction. It ruins people's lives. It endangers people's lives. It ruins families. So let's say I know this about this person, and it's not well known. But this person wants to get married. It would be good for him to get married. And the woman who's speaking to me seems like a nice girl. I want the fellow to get married. So even though I know this about them, I stay quiet. I don't want to say Lashon Hara. I don't want to say something negative. God forbid, if I would do that, I would have committed a terrible, terrible sin. Because that is the situation when I am required to say to this person, I have to tell you about such and such an issue. Now, yes, we can have a long discussion. How should I say it? Maybe there's a way I can have the person figure it out for themselves. Okay, that's a whole long discussion. But it is a fact that in many, many cases, there are people who know about this serious fault that is not publicly known. And they don't speak up. And they're committing a terrible, terrible sin by not speaking up. The pain and the suffering that is caused, they have a share in being responsible for that. There's a time to speak. There's a time to be silent. It's not always clear, I understand. So ask an expert, ask a rabbi, ask somebody you trust, ask an objective third party. It can be difficult to decide what to do. I understand that. But this concept that there is such a thing as mekach tos and kiddushay tos, this is a legal common denominator between these two. It's not a purchase. Marriage is not a purchase. But it still has to have informed consent on both sides. That's number 2. Number 3. As I said at the beginning, it's very curious that at a wedding ceremony, we're invoking this passage, which is the purchase of a field. But after all, I mean, let's just confront it. It's about a burial plot. It's about a burial, a funeral. So let's not make any jokes about marriage and death and burial. Let's stay away from that for a moment. How in the world would we want to invoke a passage that's about a burial at a wedding ceremony? So I want to share something with you. It's quite deep, and I want to give you some advice. This is not a thought that you should say to a couple under the chuppah, and if you're ever invited to give a Dvar Torah to Sheva Brachos, this is not the time to mention what I'm going to mention, but it is important. The Rambam Maimonides writes Moshe tikein liYisrael, Moshe legislated for the Jewish people 7 days of sitting Shiva. We know that Moshe not only communicated to the Jewish people the word of God, Moshe was also a legislator. He was one of the rabbis, one of the original members of the first Sanhedrin, and he legislated rabbinic legislation. So we have biblical law that comes directly from God through Moshe, but we also have rabbinic law. In this case, it's the oldest possible rabbinic law. It comes from Moshe as a rabbinic legislator. Moshe established that there should be 7 days of Shiva, 7 days of mourning. According to the Torah itself, the obligation to mourn when, God forbid, an immediate family member passes away, the obligation to mourn is only 1 day. And Moshe said there should be a rabbinic enactment. It should be 7 days. And that's the practice we have of Shiva, of sitting Shiva for 7 days. Because the loss, the death of a family member is a traumatic event. It has a deep impact. It needs to be appreciated. The person needs to be shown respect. Our lives need to be put on hold. All of the layers and issues and themes that come into sitting Shiva, it's 7 days. And the Rambam goes on to say, Maimonides writes, and Moshe tikein, and Moshe also established 7 days of celebration of a bride and groom. When a bride and groom get married, and it's the first marriage, there is an obligation of 7 days of rejoicing. 7 days where the couple's not supposed to go to work, not supposed to go on a trip by themselves, to be together, to rejoice, to celebrate their marriage. Marriage is, as we just described, it is one of the great milestones in life. It is an elevation in holiness. It has to be appreciated. It has to be celebrated. I heard this from a lecture given by Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik of blessed memory, and I had the privilege to hear this in person many years ago. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, these are not just 2 separate pieces of legislation that Moshe happened to legislate. Says Rav Soloveitchik, they are one piece of legislation, 2 sides of one coin. The moment of death of a loved one is the ultimate in existential loneliness. One of the greatest problems, one of the deepest problems that any human being has is existential loneliness, the feeling that I'm just not connected. I'm lonely. Rav Soloveitchik wrote this magnificent essay, The Lonely Man of Faith. It is a major theme that he explores in many, many different ways. And he says this is the ultimate challenge that confronts human beings. Loneliness. And the ultimate loneliness is death. And it needs to be commemorated, marked, appreciated for what it is. And it requires 7 days. Marriage is the ultimate overcoming of existential loneliness. Now, obviously, this does not apply to every single person. This is a category that Rav Soloveitchik is explaining. But marriage as an institution is the primary way that human beings are able to potentially overcome that existential angst, that existential loneliness that death is the ultimate expression of. So the fact that there are 7 days of mourning and 7 days of celebration for a wedding are not just accidentally 7 days, 7-7. It was the same piece of legislation. Moshe was expressing on a rabbinic level this idea that at our root we are anchored by this fear of loneliness, this dread of loneliness, and it's expressed when, God forbid, a loved one passes away. And in the same way, but in reverse, it is expressed at the moment of marriage. That's the reason that we invoke this burial at the moment of marriage, because they are dealing with the same issue, but different sides of the coin. Now again, you can't say this to a couple under a chuppah, and you cannot say this as Devar Torah Sheva Brachos. You have to be careful where you share this, but this is what the Rav explained, and I am suggesting, this is my part, I'm suggesting that perhaps the origin of the Rav's idea is from this connection. The fact that at a wedding ceremony we invoke the burial of Sarah, maybe this is the source of the connection that Rav Soloveitchik understands based on the words of the Rambam. There's another part of the Jewish wedding ceremony that has its source in our Torah portion, the Parsha Chayei Sarah. Before the chuppah, standing under the canopy, there is a ceremony called Bedeken. Bedeken means the groom places a veil over the face of the bride. This happens when it's a first marriage. When it's a second marriage, there are different customs, whether it is done or is not done. That's a matter of custom. There's also a difference in practice in some places. At some weddings, this Bedeken takes place in public. Everyone is watching the groom place the veil over the face of the bride. In other cases, it's private, just the family is present. Either way, different customs. Now, if you ask people, what is the reason for this ceremony? Many people will say it is to avoid the fate of Yaakov, which we're going to learn about soon in the Torah, when he married Leah, thinking that it was Rachel. Remember, Lavan, his father-in-law, tricks him. He thinks he's marrying Rachel. Turns out he's actually married to Leah. Okay, complicated story. We'll get to it. But that is not true. That is not the source of the ceremony of Bedeken, because if that was true, that it was about being able for the groom to be able to identify the bride, it would make sense to have no veil under the chuppah to make sure that they can see each other clearly. That would make more sense. In fact, I just want to mention this. There is a custom in certain parts of the Jewish people, in certain parts of the Hasidic world, there is a custom that a bride wears something called a dek tichel. Now, a dek tichel is take a veil, but it's not opaque. You can't see through it. It's solid. It's like the material of the dress. It is solid. So the bride walks down the aisle and stands under the chuppah. There's no other word I can use for it. Blinded. With a blinded. No one can see her and she can't see anyone. I have to say, it's a custom in some parts of the Jewish people. I don't want to criticize anybody in the Jewish people, but I have to say that I find this practice objectionable. First of all, if you've ever been to a wedding like this, the scene of a woman being led to the wedding canopy, literally being led because she cannot see, and she is not seeing what is happening, that in my mind, that is highly objectionable. And also, there is a technical objection because under the chuppah, the witnesses who are witnessing the giving of the ring, they have to be able to identify the bride and the groom. If they can't identify the bride and the groom, their testimony about who got married is meaningless. Okay, that's a dek tichel. It's not my thing. Some people do it. I'm not able to rationalize it. Okay. The technical reason for the Bedeken, again, the veil, of course, is translucent. Of course, the bride can see, others can see her. It's translucent. But the technical reason for the Bedeken, where the groom places the veil over the face of the bride, is because Every Jewish wedding, the groom commits to the terms of the ksuva, the marriage contract. The marriage contract, the ksuva, mentions the obligations, the commitments that the groom has towards the bride, and they include providing her, loving and respecting and honoring and cherishing, and providing the bride with everything she needs, including her clothing. The groom obligates himself to provide for the clothing of the bride. So the Bedeken is actually the first element of the formal wedding ceremony. The groom is clothing the bride by placing this veil over her face. He is fulfilling what he committed to in the ksuva, in the marriage contract. And that is the first element of the formal marriage ceremony. Okay, that is a technical reason for the Bedeken. I want to share a second reason. And let's start by discussing the subject of modesty. Modesty in dress, modesty in speech, modesty in behavior, tzniut, tznius. From a Torah point of view, from a Jewish point of view, there is nothing embarrassing or shameful about a woman's body or a man's body. A woman in no way is a second-class citizen, God forbid. In no way is that true within traditional Judaism. Even though there is a misconception in the world about such a thing, it is wrong. Again, it's wrong. Men and women have equal value before God. Men and women have equally important missions in life. And physical beauty and physical intimacy is to be appreciated. It's not embarrassing. It's not shameful. It is to be appreciated and enjoyed within the proper context between husband and wife. The reason for the Torah's laws of modesty in dress and other areas is precisely to prevent the objectification of a person, turning a person into an object. It is to prevent relating only on the basis of superficial physical appearance. We do not want that to happen. So we don't want people in public to show off their physical bodies in a way that is not normally done, because that makes them into objects, and people become attracted to them specifically for these superficial physical reasons. That's what we do not want to happen. William Butler Yeats wrote, "Only God, my dear, could love you for yourself alone, and not for your yellow hair." But that is the goal of the Torah laws of modesty, to try to love the person and not just the outer appearance. In our Torah portion, Chayei Sarah, we meet a woman who left a repressive culture, a culture that stifled her identity, and she left to help start a revolution that would change the world, that would introduce modesty and spirituality and morality into the world. And her name is Rebecca. You remember, Avraham asks his servant Eliezer to find an appropriate wife for his son Yitzchak. Eliezer travels back to where Avraham came from originally, his family, and he finds this woman Rivka, and she agrees to come with him to marry Yitzchak. And they set off together. Vatisa Rivka's einea As they were traveling, after a while, Rivka lifted her eyes, Vatera, and she saw, as Yitzchak, she saw a man in the distance. Vatipol ma'al hagamal, and she descended from the camel. She was riding on a camel. She got off the camel. Vatamar el Eved, and she said to the servant Eliezer, who was accompanying her, she said to him, Mi oish halozeh haolech basada likrosenu? Who is that man over there who's walking across the field to greet us? Vayomer ha'eved, and the servant Eliezer said, Hu Adoni, he is my master, meaning he is Yitzchak. He is the man that, of course, if you both agree, the idea is that you will be married to each other. Vatikach hatzaif vatiskas, and Rivka took a cloth and she put a veil over her face. In many places today, especially in Quebec, a woman wearing a veil is a very complex and controversial subject. But let me just say very clearly, it is a subject that should not be legislated one way or the other by any government. Rivka did not remain veiled. A woman being veiled, wearing a veil, is not a Jewish practice. But Rivka wanted to be veiled for the first moment that she and Yitzchak, her future husband, would see each other, so that his attraction to her would not only be because of her abundant physical beauty, which our sages attest to, but also because of her many internal qualities, because she was worthy to be a matriarch of the Jewish people. And this incident is the source of our practice, that a bride wears a veil under the chuppah, like Rivka, like Rebecca, so that it is clear to both the bride and the groom, the husband and the wife, and it is clear to all who are in attendance that the attraction between them should not be just due to their physical appearance, which will necessarily fade with time, but to their lasting inner qualities that will provide the basis for love and respect throughout their lives. One of our closest friends wrote this in honor of her daughter's wedding, and she read it aloud at their Sheva Brachos the night after the wedding to celebrate. She wrote, "Whose trembling smile is that, seated amid her women, her sisters joyful, tearful, putting aside for the moment all childish rivalries. She stretches to see him. He approaches with tears. It transforms her face into not her face as I know it, the smile of her youth. It is my daughter's smile as the wife of her husband, properly unknown to me and her father. It is the smile of their future together. He puts the veil down over her face." That's the goal of the Jewish concept of tzniut, of modesty, demonstrated in our Torah portion by Rivka as an essential element in the creation and formation of the Jewish people. I want to end with this. On the subject of marriage, some words of wisdom from Rabbi Moshe Katz. It's actually a story. A man went to a famous Kabbalist, a Jewish mystic in the city of Tzfat, in Israel, the city of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism. He had heard that this rabbi has miracle water. water that the rabbi blessed and was supposed to help people deal with their problems in life. Specifically, it was said that this water would help people in their marriage relationships. So he went to this rabbi and he said, I have a problem, Rabbi. It's my marriage. We don't have shalom bayis. We don't have harmony in our home. We're arguing. We're fighting. It's not going well. I need help. I need some of your holy water. The rabbi said, okay, yes, I do have holy water, and I'll give you a bottle. Here it is. He gave him a bottle. The man asked if there were any special instructions, any special way to take it, or deep thoughts to have in order for it to have the effect of calming the marriage. And the rabbi said, yes, there's a very important instruction. Here's what you do. The next time you see that you're about to say something that you will probably regret later, quickly take a drink of this water, but don't swallow it. Keep it in your mouth. Hold it there until you calm down. It will work wonders, guaranteed. So get yourself some of this holy water and follow the instructions carefully. Because if you don't have that, all the blessings of the world are not going to give you a happy marriage. But with that holy water and those instructions, with God's help, you'll get there. My friends, I wish you a great evening and a beautiful Shabbos. And I look forward to seeing you soon in person.